All right, good evening. Welcome to our class. We'll make a transition tonight from historical books. We finished with Esther last week, and this is good because if you were not happy about how things went last week with the election, tonight we talk about Job. So you can learn how to maybe suffer a little bit. I think if it went the way that you thought it should have gone, then I'm praying for you. Not so much the presidential thing. That's, there wasn't really a whole lot of difference between those two people. A little bit. Wasn't a whole lot of difference between their policies, but the things that happen in the state of Maryland, those are more interesting and more crazy. Okay. Am I okay? You need to move it up? Okay. That better? Okay. All right. All right, let's stand. Why don't we stand up? We'll have a prayer. Let's see. All right, we'll sing a great old bus ministry song here. All right? So, or whatever. Bus ministry, Sunday school song. What is that? Let's see. Lift Jesus higher. Lift Jesus higher. Lift him up for the world to see. He said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. Lift Jesus higher. Daniel, lift Jesus higher. Lift him up for the world to see. He said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. All right, that's good. Oh, you still want more? Okay, I don't know. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be free from your burden of sin? There's power in the... Thank you. Evil a victory win. There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. All right, that's good. Lord, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for songs in the key of D. And we could run 6 of them in a row and still, still not whatever. Thank you for this evening. And bless us, Lord, as we talk about these things tonight, the books of wisdom. In your name, amen. All right, so we make a transition tonight out of the books of history. Esther concluded our books of history. And, as you know, Esther is an interesting story. That was an interesting story that we ran through really quickly the last time. But suffice it to say, that was Esther was written a particular group of people, Jews who did not answer the call to go back to Jerusalem. And several thousand Jews, about 50,000, chose to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild. But Esther talks about God's heart towards those who are scattered in many lands, and we see that God protected those people. And then in 1948, God did draw all the, a group of people into a political affiliation that is now known as Israel. So that political affiliation in Israel is temporary. It's still not the fulfillment of God's covenant to give Israel all of the land and all of its territory. That will come at a certain particular time. God will give Israel its throne, and on that throne will be the Son of David, who is Jesus Christ. And he will rule and reign from a restored Jerusalem, a perfectly square city. They will do that, but that hasn't happened yet. Since 586 BC, when the Babylonians removed the group the remaining Jews out of Jerusalem and brought them as prisoners and servants and slaves to Babylon. Since that point in time, Israel has not been the kind of political entity that it was under Solomon or even after Solomon. So the political entity that is now Israel is not like it's a part of Bible prophecy, but it's not the final fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And so the thing to remember about the historical Israel is that it isn't going anywhere. It really is. If we believe the Bible, Israel is not going anywhere, regardless of what headlines might say and regardless of like some political things that might happen in the future. Israel is not going to go anywhere. It's going to be there. And it is going to be a very major part of the end times period, the tribulation, after the calling out of the church to heaven. After the rapture of the church, Israel will be an entity. There will be something that happens politically. The Antichrist will work some sort of diplomatic, wise deal that will happen. And what will they be saying about us and people who are gone? And will it really be like an amazing, like kind of devastating kind of thing to the earth? And I would say yes, and I would say no, because Jesus gave us a little bit of a hint about how the end times would be when he said, as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be in the days of the Son of Man. So if you're thinking that that Christianity is going to sort of slowly progress into some sort of major worldwide phenomenon, and a lot of people will believe on Jesus, millions, billions of people will believe on Jesus, yes, but their percentages will never be like massive. The percentage of Christians will never be to the point, and that's the thing that's going to happen in the future. So when the church is removed from the earth, there will be an amazing sort of destructive period, an amazing period of government, and then this wise man, probably someone very scholarly, it says in Daniel, it calls him a little horn. And horn in the Bible always speaks of authority. So he won't be like chances of him being like an Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of, muscular kind of guy taking over and like by force. No, he'll probably be very small, little wise, worldly wise man that will deceive the nations and people will believe it. And Israel will be at the center of that. There will be a period of time where there's like a peace of Israel, a peace with Israel, but then about midway through it, the people will begin to blame Israel for the problems that are happening to the earth. And then there will be a final showdown, and then Jesus will arrive with all of us on white horses, and that'll be an amazing time. So that's like fast forwarding through history. But since 586, I know that Israel was allowed to go back and restore its temple under the Babylonians and then under the Medes and the Persians. That happened. 516, the temple was reestablished, temple number 2. That temple was also destroyed, left in disrepair during the period of from 400 to the time of Christ's birth. And then Herod the Great spent 46 years building. Herod the Great spent 46 years building one of the most massive pieces of architecture in the Roman world. Lots of gold, and really trying to make a place for the population of the Jews that made up the majority of his province that the Roman government had set him in charge of. So he built this massive monstrosity, and the piece of that monstrosity that is left is called the Wailing Wall. So that is temple number 3. Okay, so that is there was Solomon's temple that was destroyed by the Babylonians. There was another temple that was commissioned by Cyrus the Persian during that time, and that happened. That was built. That also fell into disrepair and was destroyed somewhat. And then there was the third temple that was built, pretty much all built about on the same site. which is where the Dome of the Rock is right now. So, okay, you got all that? We'll get a lot more of that in the spring when we talk about the second part of the Bible. But, just to catch you up to where did Israel go and what's going on. God has a plan that's really going. Now we're going into what's called they call them the books of wisdom, or the poetic books. And these are books that speak to, these are books that capture our emotions. They speak to our emotions, they speak to our feelings. And so we're going to, it's important, it's significant literature in the center of our Bible, teaching us how to, to comprehend some of the things, how to endure some of the things. And so we'll go through a little bit of a review of the sections of the Old Testament. So we have 4 sections. We have the law, and that's the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And these lay the foundation for who Christ is and the nation that will produce Christ. And then the history outlines the nation preparing for its Messiah. And then the poetry is the speaking to the heart, speaking to the longing and the aspiration for this person. And then the prophecy represents the witness to the people as they choose to follow other things, idolatry, other things that are not God, that are not from heaven. But they also represent an expectation. Throughout the prophecy, when we see this at the beginning of the spring semester, throughout the prophecy we get a balanced view of things. We get the prophets speaking to the sins of the present people, the people that they're speaking to, and how God is taking notice, and that your departure from God, your captivation, your desire for idols, for things that are not of God, they are causing consequences. So the prophets speak to that. They do speak to that about what's happening and what's going to happen, and the kind of consequences that happens to people who ignore truth. But also there's a balance throughout the prophets about the expectation that one day God will set everything right. Israel will have its place in Jerusalem, and will have its rule and its reign and its land, and the world and the nations will recognize the God of heaven and Jesus Christ as his representative. So in the prophecy we see the expectation for that forward time, the expectation of what God will do in consequence to those in disobedience, and then the expectation of how God will finally completely finish his historic purpose. So, all right, next. So we were there. So the law was the legal literature, and it dealt with the moral life of the people. So Moses received and defined a spiritual ethical code for Israel. So what does that mean? Israel's separate, different, holy. They did not make images. They were not to make images. The first point was, you shall have no gods before me. You shall not make any graven image. And that was the point of the commandment. Those commandments, really that first one, if I am the Lord your God, you shall have no gods before me. You shall not make any graven image. You shall not take my name in vain. You should not serve me in a common way. Those 3 things, those 3 elements really are the source of all spirituality, all separation, all sanctification in terms of our lifestyle. So sanctification means to be set apart. The commandments and the injunctions that Moses set down, 609 of them, according to the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, the rabbis counted them. Moses gave 609 instructions. So that's pretty much governing temple life, governing family life, governing municipal life, and governing warfare, how to go to war, and how to fight, and governing everything. So Israel was to live in that guide and live under the presence of, live in the power of the presence of God in order to show the world a different way of living. show the world a way of serving the Creator that was not being represented on the earth at that time. So Israel was chosen with a world mission in mind. Israel was not chosen to be superior. Israel was chosen to be a conduit or a pipeline or a representation of God. And that's what he created Adam as a representation of himself, and that was to be that way, Adam and Eve. And then that was one man representing and speaking to all of the universe and the angelic atmosphere there. And then years, decades, centuries later, God chose Israel to be the one nation that would witness to the whole world about the way that he would deal with a group of people that would recognize who he is. Really, it says, if you want to know the essence of Habakkuk 2:4, which Paul uses, I think, 3 times in 3 different epistles to define how the just live, how those who really are righteous live. They live by faith, and this is a trust in the God of heaven. And so this is what God was going to show the world through Israel, that if you recognize me, if there is a recognition of who I am and an understanding of relationship with me, then the whole world would see it. So I'm going to make a statement and we'll say it. Reasons are never an answer for a problem. Relationships are. So that's reasons are because. Why do we serve God? Because. Because why? Because the answer to that is we serve God because we have a relationship to Him. Like that is really the only reason. So reasons do not solve. Reasons are not answers for problems. Relationships are, and that's the truth of the Bible. The relationship with God. The just shall live by faith. Faith is built on trust. And you trust God to do what He says He will do, and that's what we live our lives based upon. The 609 injunctions of Moses really are resting on that idea of trust. If I ignore what God says, then certain consequences happen. Why do they happen? Because what God says can be trusted. So, all right, move on. The history books dealt with the nation and the political group of the people, and here's how it went. Pretty much. We go to Exodus, we see the nation is taken out of its bondage, and then it progressed to this. They were redeemed, and then they rebelled, they were disciplined, then they were deported, and then they were restored. So that's the history of Israel in a nutshell. There are 5 points. It was called by God, it was rescued by God, redeemed by God to be the kind of nation that would have a relationship with Him, that would have someone hearing from Him. Hearing from Him, speaking to the people, the nation, and the nation would serve in the context of the words that were coming from God, and then the world would see. And we see like a real small picture of that in the historical books when we think of the time of Solomon. Because in the time of Solomon, there's total peace, there's absolute amazing prosperity in Israel, and the king has wisdom beyond all wisdom. And it says that all the nations were bringing presents to Solomon to get his word from God, to get the word from God that he had. Just a problem, Solomon was a man, and all men are liars. And Solomon had his heart stolen away by his, or he gave his heart away to sensuality and the exotic nature of all the peoples that were coming to him. So it says he loved or cleaved in love to many foreign women, and those women who did not serve, who did not recognize the God of heaven, and he built altars to them so that he could enjoy the sensuality with them, and then that drove his heart away. And then, ever since then, the nation of Israel has been looking for that kind of state. If you're looking for what's the problem with Israel, they are not looking to rebuild the tabernacle of David, as it says in Amos. They are really looking to rebuild the temple of Solomon. So they are one king short of where they should be looking back to. Okay, the temple of Solomon was grand. The time of Solomon was prosperous. It was rich. Silver was of no account in the days of Solomon. It didn't matter if you had silver. What's that? Gold is the only currency in Solomon's Jerusalem. But the tabernacle of David was what? What was the tabernacle of David? It's a trick question. I don't think you know the real answer. But the tabernacle of David was not a massive structure. Tabernacle of David was his heart after God. So Amos talks about the restoration of the tabernacle of David. God is looking for a tabernacle of people who worship him with their hearts. David's tabernacle was a little tent that he pitched in the backyard of the palace, and that's where he put the Ark of the Covenant. And so we know that that's like all out of order with what we know from Leviticus. Like, David is not a Levite, David is not a priest, and yet he's dancing before the Lord in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant is out where everyone can see it, you know? Which is like kind of amazing. Like, the presence of God is in the backyard of David. And this is the point that Amos will make, and the prophet Amos will make, is that God is looking for that day when he will restore the tabernacle of David. That's it. Israel's political mindset and the mindset of their ultra-religious groups in Israel are looking for a restoration of the authority on earth that Israel had in the days of David and Solomon, primarily in the days of Solomon. They are looking for that kind of Messiah. They were not looking for the kind of Messiah that Jesus was, and they are not really looking for the tabernacle of David to be established. They are looking to erect. They are looking for somehow to blow up the Dome of the Rock and erect the temple that they think should be there rightfully, so that they can be. So this is their consciousness in their mindset, and this is the political mindset. It's not from God. It's not biblical. It's, it is something that they will weep over in the last days. So they're disciplined, deported, but they could have, they were redeemed. They were given the messages of God. They were given the presence of God. They were revealed. They were shown to be God's chosen nation to witness to the world. And Solomon's first, during those days, Solomon did have, Queen of Sheba came, took her breath away. That's what she heard Solomon talk about. He answered all her questions, it says. Okay. Poetic literature will deal with the spiritual life of the people. Prophetic literature in the Old Testament will deal with the future messianic life of the people. So here we are now. This is our last part of this semester. We're going to deal with this spiritual life of the people, the emotional kind of connection that God is looking to establish. So, God he didn't just lay down the 609 injunctions of Moses and not give them some sort of other kind of literature or instruction or song, really. Song, if you're looking like Psalms is full of song and poetry and power. And God knew exactly what Israel needed. When Israel went through the Red Sea, how did they celebrate on the other side? They celebrated with a song sang by Miriam. Like, it wasn't even like, throw that around. Like, can there be female song leaders? Bible seems to say that perhaps. I'm just saying you have to figure that out with God. But all I know is after they went through the Red Sea on the other side, that's my opinion. Don't go in and say that. Pastor Steve said it's way cool that if a girl leads songs. I said, that's between you and your elders, other churches there. I understand that whole thing. So anyway, yeah, just don't call them worship pastors. That's another whole kettle of fish. All right, so I know that there are a couple out there who write really good songs, and I think we sing some of them, but that's okay. Anyway, so, but God, how Israel went through the Red Sea and song, that's it. And so God set the rules, but he also gave the song so that people could sing and make it through life. It's sort of like, if you look at history at all, at least since 1900, you see that a generation comes, a generation invents its music, and then a generation invents its clothing style, and then the next generation comes along and usually steals from a couple generations back. Like wide-bottom jeans and all that kind of stuff, we were wearing those in the 70s, and now they're back, or they're starting to fade again. That kind of stuff. That's all right. And all that hip-hop kind of sampling of songs that I grew up listening to, what's that all about? It's called theft. That's what it is. It's called theft. So, anyway, just want to know, you know. All right. Poetry is about what's in the hearts of God's people. That's what this is about, poetry and wisdom. It's what's in the heart, and they reflect spiritual experiences, spiritual experiences. They reflect it, and Christ, you know, quoted these three Psalms, in particular, Psalm 22 on the cross. We know that Christ quoted that, and the early church was really indebted to this. You know, for its, you got to think about like the Roman world. 60% of that world, those people were in some sort of servanthood. I use that word as opposed, because when I say slavery, everyone thinks about the American model in the South, and that's not true. In the Roman world, servanthood or bondage was not like your whole person was owned by the person you were working for. Think more like butlers and waitresses and butlers and maids and those kind of things that you might see in movies or something. I don't think anyone in here has a butler, you know, or any kind of housekeeper, that live-in housekeeper, that kind of thing, you know. So, but that's the kind of thing that happened in those days. So, what I'm saying is that like the idea of having like public education, it was something that Alexander the Great really tried to introduce in all of his conquered territories. He really wanted to introduce the idea of education as the Greeks knew it. So there was this kind of thing happening, but for the most part, people did not have the scriptures to carry around. They did not read and write the way that we do, you know, and now the way that, you know, we're like in a post-paper culture, because now everything is twitted and tweeted and all that, and at Facebook, all that kind of stuff, that's happening now. But, you know, so we're in like we're coming to like a post-paper culture almost. I read, you know, what was it? How many remember Shahan? Shahan, yeah, I guess in Shahan, if you're watching this, I guess in Sri Lanka, he was taking notes on his iPad and got reprimanded for like using a device in church. So his Bible's there, you know, I understand it because you got like 6 versions. You can say, hey, that's the King James, I can jump over that. I understand, I use it all the time in church to, you know, to do that kind of stuff, you know, and it helps sometimes because sometimes the pastor asks me, can you look up this verse? Can you get it in this version? So the reason I use my iPad on stage in church is because it's part of my work material. I'm just saying that. I'm not checking the scores. Trust me, I do not check the scores until after the service is over. So, anyway. So the early church needed the songs and needed this kind of rhythm and rhyme to give people a way to remember the scriptures, to remember the truth. You know, the whole history of Israel is wrapped up in one of these psalms, and they just tell the history of Israel. Psalm 119 is 176 verses divided into 22 8-verse stanzas, and it matches up with the alphabet of the Hebrews. And so, and if you were to read it in Hebrew, you would find out that each sentence begins with the letter that it's designated under. Aleph is the first Hebrew letter, and so the first 8 are Aleph. Bet is the second, so the next 8 begin with Bet, and then so on, all the way through the Hebrew alphabet. So the early church really, the scriptures were being circulated finally. I mean, some people were reading them and they were starting, but you know, it wasn't possible for everyone to have the big scrolls to read through. You know, we have it all like in the palm of our hand now. Can you look up, you know, Genesis 27:27, if there is a Genesis 27:27. Can you look it up? You can, and voila, there it is, right on there. Back then, can you look up Genesis 27, you know, and you tell your friend to hold that part of it, and you roll it out. There it is, right there. And, you know, that wasn't possible in the, you know, but the Psalms were the way that the early church communicated truth. Especially since they communicate it in a way that's not so legalistic. Like reading the books of Moses might have been like amazingly weighty to some of these people. And it did take some people like into confusing directions. Paul in the book of Galatians had to deal with people trying to turn Christians into Jews first, and then they could become Christians. Like, okay, well, first you got to understand all this about, you got to make yourself just like an Israelite. You got to be circumcised, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to practice all the feasts, and then you can become a Christian. Because Christianity is the succession, it is a Jewish religion. I don't know if you knew that, but it is. It's like everything about what we believe is a fulfillment of what the Jews have taught since coming out of Egypt, since what Moses received. So we are the fulfillment of it. We teach, and so that's why it's very important for us to understand how it all relates to that. And it will help us. If we have an understanding of that, it will help us. It will help you if you ever get into a conversation with a Jewish person. If you want, it's very interesting. I used to work with a lot of Jewish people, and I would explain their holidays to them, because they don't really read their Bible. They go to their temple, they listen to everything, but they don't really know what their Bible says. They don't even know what the book of Moses says. They don't really know what Passover is, what it represents. They don't know what the Feast of Tabernacles is, although they celebrate it. They don't know what the Feast of Purim is and how it's celebrated because of what Esther did. And then, so I got a great chance every so often at the newspaper I worked at to tell the Jewish people who were sitting around the table with me, the desks with me, what their holidays meant. Ask Bible Steve. He could probably tell us what it all means. And that's, I'd read the Bible enough, I could explain to them. Really? That's what it's about? And I would get to a certain point, and so what do you believe about that? I said, I believe that Jesus is the fulfillment of that. Oh, okay, that's right, because you're one of those born-again people. Yes, I am. I believe the Bible. And I said, most of the Bible was to your people. Do you understand that? So the early church, got to listen to the teaching and singing the teaching and hearing the teaching. It was in rhythm, it was in rhyme, and it was easier for them to understand. So these poetry books, these wisdom books, really were responsible for the early church becoming the spiritual force that it became in the Roman world and then in the world at large. You all right? You with me? Okay. So we have in the poetic writings, we have these three periods of writing, really. So we have the book of Job that was probably written either by Moses or dictated to Moses by someone. This story, Moses is, or someone close to Moses put this story down. And it was a very important story. And it's probably the oldest, many scholars believe that this was the first book of the Bible committed to writing, probably. And why would that be? Well, one thing, Israel had suffered for 430 years in Egypt, and it was still a big question, like, why did God allow that? And it was still a big question, like, why was God allowing Israel to wander in the wilderness? And so Job explains a lot of things about the nature of God, about the nature of Satan, and about the nature of suffering. So it's back in that 2000 BC period. David did a lot of writing, a lot of Psalms of David in there. About 100 are probably directly attributed to him. So about 100 BC. And then his son Solomon wrote Song of Solomon, which is a story of young man's love. So that's, it's a great, Proverbs is a middle-aged man's wisdom, and then Ecclesiastes is an old man's sorrow. So now there is like sort of, how did Solomon write these things? Some people say that he wrote Song of Solomon early in his life, and then he wrote Ecclesiastes late in his life. I flip that around. I kind of think that Solomon wrote, it says he wrote, 3,000 Proverbs and 1,005 songs. I think that's what it says, right? So Solomon was a prolific writer, dictating a lot of things. But I think at the end of Solomon's life, he probably thought back to what it was really like to be in love with the one true love. He had 1,000 women in his life, but there was one. Apparently there was one who was different from all the rest. and she is immortalized in Song of Solomon. So I like to think that, at some point in his life when Solomon, when you read Ecclesiastes, Solomon talks about, he uses graphic metaphors to describe how he can't hear, he can't taste, he can't walk right, his bones and everything are failing under pressure. And I think he wrote that, and then he wrote Song of Solomon last, thinking about, at some point he was faced with his mortality, and he remembered something precious from his younger days. But I could be wrong. I like to think that maybe Solomon, towards the end of his life, he got, he wrote this thing rather than just sort of sliding into death. I hope that that's the way it is, but that's my opinion. But it could have been that he wrote this song early, and it became a greatest hit. The first love song that everyone, your teeth is like a flock of goats. Oh, just amazing. What girl wouldn't swoon over something like that, that kind of thing. And Proverbs is, during the raising of his children, he taught these things. And then Ecclesiastes is really, and it's really amazing that when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, and it's really amazing that this book is ordained by God to be in there, because it's really 90% of it is very negative about things that can happen to you. It really doesn't matter what you do. Every now and then you get a little glimpse of a little statement, and then at the end he finally says the whole thing that we should do is enjoy, is worship God and enjoy life. And it's but that he doesn't come to that until the 12th chapter. So, all right, where am I? Okay, so here's the way the books, Christ and these books, there's this cry throughout the book of Job that we need this mediator. And we're going to look at Job tonight first. And so there is this cry in everyone's heart. It's the heart's cry of the world for someone to stand for me. And so that we find that in Job. Job is looking for a person who knows me and then at the same time can go before God with me. And that's a basic definition of mediation. You know me, and then you also can go before God for me. You have that kind of authority, advocacy, mediation. And Psalms is just a way to define communion with Christ. And there's some amazing, Psalm 109 is amazing because it tells you that you can actually talk to God about having Satan stand at the right hand of one of your enemies. It's Lord, let Satan stand at his right hand. It's that's an amazing thing that you would be able to say to God. It's what is that? This is inspired, and you got to read the whole psalm to get how this kind of venting of bad feeling before the Lord, transforms. Most of those, they have a special name. They're called imprecatory psalms. It means, psalms that carry a curse. It's almost like you're pronouncing a curse on someone. And you are. And you read those psalms, and you're going, I never heard Jesus talk like this. And he could have. It's the thing is that, John and James said, let's call fire down on these people. And Jesus said, you don't know what spirit you're of. And then, at the cross, the Pharisees are saying, come down and we will believe you. And even to when he's talking to Pilate, Jesus said, do you know the authority that I have to call legions of angel armies right here that could help me? And Jesus could have done that. And it's it's kind of interesting. I don't see Jesus talking the way that people talk in the Psalms. But God let these people write these things, then God put them in our Bible because we're men and we think like this. And God has given us a place to put those kind of thoughts. It's healthy for us to complain to the Lord, to make our complaint to the Lord, to put them before Him, because He's really the only one that can handle those kind of things. And ultimately, He's the only one that can craft the right kind of response to our need in that kind of situation. So, He allows us to vent and to spill our guts, and no matter what kind of venom is in there. And then you'll notice in those Psalms how, towards the end of them, things change a little bit. And the person gets right with God. After talking to God seems to help the person get right with God, and that's a big theme in the Psalms. Psalm 13 is 6 verses that are sort of amazing. At the beginning, he's like yelling at God, "How long? Like, how long will you forget me? Like, forever?" It's like, here I am, I'm like serving you, ruling these people. This is like David talking, and then by the end he's saying, "Let my lips praise you." It's like about verse 5, there's 6 verses in that. Verse 5, things change, and he, 4 verses he's talking about, "Have you forgot me? Where the heck are you? Don't you realize just what kind of trouble I'm in?" And at the end he's like, "Praise the Lord." It's like, and how does that happen? My theory is there's 150 Psalms because you have 150 different persons living inside of you and me. There's like 100 different kinds of people there, and God has like an answer for every single one. Here's a Psalm for you. Just take this and you'll be better. And the truth of the matter is, it works. It works. If we can allow ourselves to enter into this kind of communication with God, it does work. Proverbs will exalt the wisdom of Christ. Ecclesiastes will reflect the desire for true fulfillment. Like that's Ecclesiastes, a form of Ecclesiastes was sung by the Rolling Stones. It's, "I can't get no satisfaction." It's like, it's the truth. All throughout Ecclesiastes, it's like vanity of vanities. Everything I do doesn't add up to anything. Translation into the 1960s, a bunch of long-haired guys with guitars. "I can't get no satisfaction, though I try, and I try." It's just, the heathen sometimes speak what is real, and that's the truth. They just have to go finding the answer in Christ. So, but that's, throughout that, there's like this cry for satisfaction, and it reflects that in every man there is this, it's the verse in the Bible where it says God has set eternity in the heart of every man. When Pastor Schaller draws the heart that has the hole in it, that is that space there that God has set in every man. Only God can fulfill that. There's something, the spirit of a man is the candle of the Lord. And so until that space in a person is really filled by the Holy Spirit, there is no fulfillment. And then the Song of Solomon is like, this is the, it really reveals in the context in a very graphic and descriptive and romantic, sensual love poem, reveals the joy and thrill of a union with Christ by using the husband-wife, the physical relationship that's given by God for the husband and the wife. It's like, if you're wondering why this thing has such power, it's because the reality of a union with Christ also could have some sort of power on a spiritual level. Imagine you feel this way physically in a relationship that's right and romantic and real and precious, not cheap and weird and, controlling, but right and romantic and real, and the kind of thrill that is in that relationship physically. Imagine that spiritually with the church for all of eternity. And really, the Song of Solomon talks about this kind of the husband and the wife talking to each other, growing old together, and then how the love starts this way and how the love continues this way. And that's, and it's there in 8 chapters. It's powerful, and it's, and so it's a kind of literature that that the rabbis will not let any young man read if he's under 18. Because when they start describing all the little pieces of the puzzle and all the little things that happen in there, it's, well, you're gonna hear it. So, come and hear it. It's an interesting class. So, all right. Now the next thing is parallel structures. Okay. So now we come to the technical kind of thing. We have the heart behind it, and now, okay, 3 chords in the truth, and you pretty much got a hit in most Christian circles. If you could be a song leader knowing 3 chords in the truth, pretty much. G, C, D. Probably you can write like 50 songs that way. Probably there are 50 songs that way. Seems like when I listen to the radio, there's about 175 songs that way. And they're all on the playlist right now, again and again and again. Anyway, but there is structure. And Hebrew poetry uses grammatical forms to reinforce truth. Okay, so there isn't like roses are red, violets are blue, you know, what was it? My feet stink and so do you. That kind of poetry, the kind of rhyme that would happen. It's not like based on rhyme. It's really based on grammatical forms, couples, triplets, quatrains. And the thing is, the amazing thing about it is, it's not sort of like Shakespearean. Like you know what was Shakespeare written in? Do you know what it's called? It has a special name. Iambic pentameter, 5 beats per measure. Like every Shakespearean line has like 5 points of emphasis, and so the once the play starts, and it was like hypnotic, because you had like a lot of drunken serfs that would come to the Globe Theater and listen to the Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet, and like the rhythm of everything would keep them connected to the stage, and that's why it became so popular. It's like there was a method to the madness that, why did he write all those things kind of like that rhythm? Why does that happen? Because the rhythm kept the people connected to the next thing. And you don't realize just how much, but you'll find out like in a few years, like when some of the songs that are popular today become elevator music. And you're sitting on an elevator in a hospital or a hotel or something, and you're listening to the song, and all of a sudden your feet starts to tap, and then you start remembering all the words. It's like the rhythm and the whole thing, it's like your body and your mind and your nervous system is like this amazing storage facility, and you can be sitting there, and you can not have heard a song, a song written in 1964, and all of a sudden it's in 1001 violins. You don't hear any words, but you hear the tune, and all of a sudden all the words come flooding back. It'll happen to you. It happens to me all the time. It'll happen to you. All right? Huh? No, we're all the same. We're all the same. But the thing about the grammatical structures, this means that the Bible can be translated. There isn't like this rhythmic pattern that has to be duplicated to get the message across. It's a grammatical structure. And so it's not built on rhythm and rhyme. It's built on concepts, and concepts building upon concepts. So biblical poetry is transmitted in any language, so there's no concern for the meter or the rhyme. If you had to translate, you can't translate Shakespeare into another language. Because if you tried to, maybe you can translate it with subtitles, but if you tried to translate it, you lose the whole 5 beats per measure kind of rhythm that goes through it. It's just not as powerful. Okay. So there's types of parallels. We'll go through these and then we'll take a break. Synonymous kinds of parallels. Both lines say basically the same thing in different ways. Here's an example. Job 38:7, a metaphor, and then angels. All the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God sounded for joy. So this is like morning stars, bright beings singing and shouting for joy to God. So this is the first part is like a bright being, like a morning star, and the second, the sons of God, speaking of angels. So it says basically the same thing. The morning stars sang together, the sons of God shouted for joy. So this is synonymous. The second line says pretty much the same thing as the first line, just to emphasize it. The next time is antithetical, which is the second line is a contrast. So here's one from Proverbs. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14:34. So that's the opposite. So you have the synonymous, one line, second line. This one phrase, second phrase is an opposite kind of thing, antithetical. And then the next one is a synthetic kind of. I'm sorry. Antithetic, second line, is different from the first line. Proverbs 14:34, you don't have to write that whole verse down. You can look it up in your Bible, because your Bible, I think, is the same as my Bible. So I hope so, anyway. Unless you got one of those, special Bibles. Okay. Anyway, synthetic parallel. Okay. each line builds upon the line before it. Now this is Psalm 1:3, just the beginning, and they're all sort of related. So this is like an extended metaphor that happens. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. He brings forth fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he does shall prosper. So you see, you are a tree, you have fruit, you don't die, you're an eternal kind of evergreen tree, your leaf does not wither, and whatever you do shall prosper. This is, Psalm 1 starts out by talking about, blessed is the man who, let's see, how's it? Let's read it. It says, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And in his law he meditates day and night. So the person who meditates in the law of the Lord is like this. And so these things build upon each other. Same sort of, grammatical structure is same. It's good for, in the Hebrew, it's good for memorizing. The grammatical structure is same. The structure of the lines is the same in terms of subject, noun, verb, that kind of thing. The order is like that, like Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed, there's like there's a order there and a form that's used there, and that's one thing about poetic structures. There's forms and authorities of forms and those kind of things, and then the parallel builds like this. So you get like several ideas in this metaphor about a godly man who meditates, a godly person who meditates is like this, and it starts out, the Psalms start out this way with this great chapter. Okay, next one. And then there's this exemplar parallel. One line metaphorically illustrates the literal truth of the other. Okay, so iron sharpens iron. So like, sharpening swords. And so a good friend, a man sharpens the countenance of a friend. If you are friends, there are sparks. It's like what it's saying is like iron, like just like when two soldiers sharpen their swords by sharpening together, there's some sparks that happen. So in a good friendship, there are some disagreements or some confrontations that happen. Iron or the friendship pretty much goes nowhere. It's not very interesting, It's not very interesting. A marriage like that would not be very interesting. I mean, my marriage has been full of iron sharpening iron, and it's much more interesting that way to have someone who's a lot different from you, living with you for 30 years and talking to you the way that she thinks and not always agreeing with you, because sometimes that's better for your whole human situation. Just trust me on that one, If you find someone who always agrees with you, that's probably not the person you want to get married to. You want to have someone who's a little bit strong in her convictions, his convictions, and isn't so influenced by everything that you want, So, and that usually finds out in maybe the type of pizza you like. I don't know. It can reveal itself in many ways. Anyway, this other one is like, a continuing dripping on a rainy day and a contentious woman are alike. I'm sorry. We could just say a contentious person. The Hebrew likes to use the feminine, but a continual dripping on a rainy day and a contentious woman are alike. Someone who constantly complains is like a drip. There you go, water torture. There you go. Here's another one. Okay, now this is like the current of parallel forms. Why are these so powerful all over the world? Because every culture seems to have this kind of proverbial teaching somehow. Like here's one, there's a Sanskrit, Sanskrit, this language of the Chaldeans, had this proverb on the bottom, even a fool when he's covered with fine clothes is to that extent fair in the assembly, yet a fool is fair so long as he utters no word. Like you can dress up a fool and set him loose in a party, and as long as he doesn't talk, no one will know that he's a fool. But when he talks, everyone knows. And that's the same thing that the Proverbs 17 from Solomon is saying. Even a fool, when he holds his peace, is counted wise. When he shuts his lips, he's esteemed as prudent. So you see this proverbial kind of teaching that Jesus did, this with parables and making these kind of comparisons, using things that that help explain like deeper emotional, spiritual principles. This is something that is like worldwide. Missionaries have gone into primitive tribal cultures, and they've been astounded by some of the parables that they've heard from them and how close they are to some biblical principles. And so it's kind of interesting. If you read, there's a book by Don Richardson called Eternity in Their Hearts, and you'll see in there that there's a whole chapter on people of the lost book. And like these people have had these sayings, and then someone opens the Bible, and the primitive tribe that has never really had a language written down has a saying that's pretty close to something in Proverbs. And where did they get that from? Of course, we know from Psalm 19 that God has a witness everywhere. So it's a good book. I recommend it. We're actually doing it in the book club if you're interested in being a part of that. Anyway, okay, so here's the bottom lines, and we'll take a break. The bottom lines for the poetic books. Job will show you how to suffer. Psalms teaches us how to sing. Proverbs teaches us how to behave. Ecclesiastes teaches us how to see the world and our witness in it. And then Song of Solomon teaches you how to love. So if you want, those are the bottom line ideas in each of these books. What do I have next here? Okay. All right, so we're going to go to Job when you come back. So if you come back in 10 minutes, we'll start talking about the book of Job and all that it entails. All right? Okay, thanks.